we could talk about that right now if you want,
right?
but basically, um, one thing, major thing that, especially if, let's say, I've had people who actually have retained me as a lawyer to work on their client terms and conditions. And then they have then put that contract that I prepared for them into AI to see if I missed anything. Um, and then what happens is you're feeding that into the database, and you've basically lost all confidentiality and all potential protections from attorney-client privilege. You know, arguably, if something were to happen, potentially, let's say if that client sued you, if technically, like, I mean, that could be a breach, basically. So this is something that I do not recommend. And I know people think they've come back to me. They've actually come back here. I put this in AI and these are the suggestions. And I looked at it and half of them were like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, so I'm spending my time for them, which means they're paying me again at my hourly rate to review and what AI said. And I'm telling them, no, that's actually wrong, or that doesn't make sense. There may have been a couple little things here or there, but most of it's semantics. It's not, I have never found anything of substance that AI has caught me on, so to speak. So I feel confident in my work. And I think if you're paying a lawyer to draft these terms and conditions for you, you should also feel comfortable with that. Like I said, there's one of the biggest risks is if you start putting any type of contract, especially if it's something that you sign, let's say a vendor contract even, or a supplier contract, or those types of things. And then later on there's a dispute or litigation down the line. If it were ever found out that you somehow put that into AI, you could lose the attorney-client privilege. So, and all the legal advice that that attorney gave you relating to that document. So that's my fear, and that's what I hope people trust their lawyers. I understand why people can't necessarily afford a lawyer every time, so then they're putting the documents in, but there is definitely a risk there.
I saw an article on that not too long ago that, yeah, somebody lost client attorney client privilege because they put things, they were asking legal questions of AI and therefore they were putting it out into open source. So the
Yes,
judge ruled it no longer confidential.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Wow. Okay. Let's get into it.
This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast. And here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Wow. Today's episode is going to be phenomenal already. If you already caught it in the intro, like we're going to get into it. Welcome, Ganesh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Glenda. I'm really, really honored to be here.
Fabulous. Well, Ganesh is a travel lawyer, business lawyer, all in the travel industry here, based out of Richmond, Virginia. And so, as with all things, when you involve a lawyer, we're going to start with a disclaimer.
Yes, absolutely. So let me give my fabulous disclaimer because I wouldn't be a lawyer without one. So basically, anything I say here during this podcast is for educational purposes only, and I'm not providing any type of legal advice. When you listen to this podcast, it does not create an attorney-client relationship between us. And also, this podcast could actually be considered attorney advertising material. So there's my little disclaimer, and we can go from there.
Fabulous, fabulous. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this line of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have been an attorney for about 25 years. I can't believe it's been that long. But yeah, so my career has evolved. Started out working in a very large law firm, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia. And then I went in-house, which basically means you're working actually as an employee in the legal department of a company. So I worked at a few different banks. And then I actually, back in 2018, before remote working became in vogue, I actually went with a company that was all what they call it distributed. Completely, everyone was remote, and and it was a very small legal department. I won't even call it a department, a legal team. So it was a tech company basically. So I did some work for them. So I've been kind of all over. I've also at that point I realized I've always had a passion for travel. I I've traveled my whole entire life and I've always planned trips and people have always asked me for advice. So I thought I would just maybe start doing that. As everybody says, side gig, side hustle. I actually really hate that term nowadays, but it kind of was at the time.
Yeah.
So I basically started getting into that and actually started with a predominantly Disney-oriented agency because that at the time was where I really had tons of knowledge. Because I had a young child growing up. We'd always go to Disney, do Disney cruises, that type of thing. So I started with a smaller with a Disney agency. Then I moved to a smaller boutique agency. And then I decided I really wanted to grow my business. So, and kind of have branch out and have my own brand. So then I actually jumped ship and went to Nexion, which I remain with today. So I've been with Nexion for about 3 years now. So how did I become a travel lawyer through all that? I continued. I've never quit being a lawyer through all of this. So, but I basically had 2019 is when I started my travel business as an entrepreneur. I also had been doing a lot. I guess some of the remote work and having my own business kind of got me more into something they call freelance lawyering, which basically using my own, deciding what types of assignments I want to take on my terms. And so I started doing a little bit of that. And then I kind of slowly made the transition let me just start my own firm. And because I've been into travel for so long, I kept seeing repeatedly all these issues. And I created my own documents for myself as a travel advisor, as a business owner, all my business documents. To me, that was very easy to do. It's something that I've done for others, in terms of helping people out. So I did it all for myself, and I realized there's a huge need in this industry. A lot of travel advisors don't know what they don't know, as they say. So it was one of those things where I felt like I was uniquely positioned to help educate and help others in that regard. And, there are other travel lawyers in the industry, but they're not many at all. There are only a handful of us, believe it or not, just in the United States alone. I mean, maybe like 10 to 15 at most. And I actually met a bunch of them this past spring in Toronto. We had a gathering. So it was really nice to meet some folks in person. But so that's basically how I became a travel lawyer. So I have two hats. I am an entrepreneur, actually an entrepreneur both for my law firm and my agency. So that's the business side of things. And then obviously I know travel industry now inside out, being an advisor, knowing and understanding host agency agreements, knowing what we need to do for client terms and conditions. What about, do you need a credit card authorization form? What does that need to say? Like, what do you need to do to protect yourself as an advisor, as for your business, to protect your business? So, I feel like I'm uniquely positioned in that regard, and it's been really rewarding to work with advisors. I have to say, like, because I feel like you get it, you're my people. Yeah.
Well, and I think it also allows you to kind of remove that techinese where,
Mhm.
there's just certain vocabulary that lawyers use, and then there's vocabulary that travel advisors use. And sometimes it's like they're speaking two different languages. They're in the same room and nobody knows what the other one's talking about.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where I think it's really good for, I mean, if you're a travel advisor and you're either whether you're first starting out or if you've been in the business for a while, I mean, I always think it's a good gut check just to see okay, did I even form a company? Some people don't even have companies. That's a whole nother thing. But am I properly formed as a company, as a business? Am I operating great how I should be as a business? And where am I exposed? Like, where are there potential risks or liability? And it's sort of, that's kind of my role, and how I try to help people is kind of help them identify where they may have those risks and help them mitigate that. Like, what is the best practical way to find a solution or to help you protect yourself, basically.
That's awesome because I would 100% agree that there is a lot of advisors who have almost become accidental business owners
Hmm.
because they became an advisor because they wanted either their own trips at cost
Right.
or, well, I'm just going to plan for a few family members. There's a big influencer online who's just opened their own host agency, and they are onboarding hundreds of advisors in one movement. And every part of me is screaming, holy crap.
Yeah. That sounds a bit scary to me because who knows like what she has or he, what this
Right?
person has. Yeah.
And but also too, even just reading the comments of what people are asking for, because there's a lot of, well, is there a minimum, or can I just get all of my own travel at cost? And they're like, oh, for sure, we can bring you on for that. You don't have to. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because the ones that start off, I'm just going to do it for myself, accidentally become a travel advisor because now they're going to start selling to other people. And because they only did it for this, they're not getting the right licenses. They're not getting the right protections. They're not getting the right insurances. They're definitely not legally covering their butt. And if somebody has decided they went from being hosted to now creating their own host agency, they didn't even run their own agency in between. Do they have the systems and processes that covers their own legal butt? Because from what I've seen, they started their host agency or they started their own agency as an accidental travel advisor themselves and just influenced their way into something. And I'm like, do you actually have what you need to have behind the scenes to help the advisors?
Exactly. I mean, so there's the perspective, the perspective of the host agency owner, which in this case is the influencer. And then there's the perspective of the hundreds of people that this person is recruiting, which is basically I hope independent advisor, but who knows how it's set up. They could even be deemed an employee of this person if they don't have a proper agreement in place, which opens up a whole nother can of worms. So yeah, and one thing about the travel industry that's very different maybe from certain other industries is it's considered a high risk industry. If you look, and this is for instance, like if you look at if you want to, for instance, get like a direct payment processing, like if you want to charge fees and you want to open an account with a payment processor, you're actually flagged as being high risk because there are a lot of chargebacks. There are people that like customers are like, I didn't like that cruise. I want a refund. So they'll do a chargeback. I mean, what? You can't do that, but it happens. And so because the credit card companies have to deal with that, that alone shows some of the high risk. But you can imagine, I mean, people are traveling all around the world. Imagine, global, like all the global chaos we've experienced in the past few years. I mean, I say chaos, that might be a little overblown, but yeah, there are a lot of risks to travel just generally. And suppliers can go bankrupt, all sorts of things can happen. And how is that being accounted for in your documentation? Like, whether you're the actual advisor working directly with the customer, whether you're the host agency hosting these advisors. I mean, this is all just applies, just blanket applies to
Yep.
any type of host agency owner, even though well, I'll put in quotes here, the legit ones, the ones who actually purposely formed a company, purposely are like trying to grow and aren't doing it based on like some type of influencer model. So you just have to be very deliberate and how you set up your just as you want to set up your systems and your back office and whatnot, and you need to do the same thing from a legal perspective and make sure that your everything, you cross all your T's and dot all your I's and make sure that you're protected. And honestly, you don't have to do it alone. I mean, that's why I keep saying, people don't know what they don't know. And that's why I think it's good for folks to be aware of travel attorneys and be aware of the role that we can play and help guide you throughout your entrepreneurial career.
I will say some of the best relationships you can have for your business. You need your toolbox. It's
Hmm.
your accountant, it's your lawyer, it's your insurance rep. I was just emailing with mine prior to hopping on hopping on the podcast today because my commercial is up for renewal, and making sure that you have all of those pieces in place. My
Yeah.
son is a real estate agent, and he had a young kid who wanted to, I love that I'm talking about my son dealing with a young kid, and my son is a young kid. But he was saying that he's like, this kid came and him and his buddy, they want to open a business and they've got all of these amazing ideas. He's like, but they don't know anything. And yet they were ready to sign a lease with another realtor. He goes, and I was like, no. And because when he was talking with him, because he is friends with them, but because they're like, well, you're a realtor, you have this information. And so what would you do? And so he walked him through it, and they didn't have a business plan. They didn't have anything beyond an idea and a bank account. And so the one kid, his parents had said, you need to slow down. You need a business plan. You need to work this out. You need to. And so he said to this kid, he goes, you need to listen to your parents. So I did kind of chuckle. I'm like, so how'd that feel? Like, to say you should listen to your parents. He's like, I don't want to talk about it. But then that's where him and I had this conversation about the toolbox you need. You need somebody in your municipality. Is there permits you need for running that business? Are you going to a storefront? Are you going to do it from your home? Not all people can run businesses from their home, or there's specific guidelines. In the city that I'm in, I can run a business from home. However, I cannot have signage anywhere on my home that says, not that I would, but if I was doing a travel agency, I might want to. I've seen travel agencies in my town with signs on their balconies and other such. But you've got to know, what are the allowances? What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do?
I totally agree. And I love the word toolkit. I actually, one of my presentations that I've done to fellow travel advisors is like what you need in your legal toolbox or toolkit, same thing, like what should go in there? Because there's like all sorts of things you can think about. And it's from legal perspective, obviously, yeah, I agree. Having an accountant, huge. I mean, that actually will drive a lot of your decisions in terms of how you form your business, what type of business you have, your setup, that type of thing. So those are probably the two most important. And insurance, absolutely. Like some folks will actually assume that they're covered by their host agency. More than likely, your host agency, yes, they will have E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance. However, whether they want to add you or not is one thing. And even if they do add you, they may choose not to like pursue a claim. They don't have any obligation to do that. So I always advise get your own, no matter what your host agency says.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us back to having a conversation about contracts, because when we were first having our conversation, I had just released a bunch of host agency podcasts. And so then the questions all started to come in, and I got things like, I've decided I want to switch my host agency, but I just read my contract and there's a non-compete in there. I'm not allowed to work for, or not allowed to sign. Now, this is what I loved about this particular one. I'm not allowed to sign with another host agency for 6 months after my contract ends. And I'm like, what? And she's like, no, they told me I can't work for anybody else. I'm like, no. As an independent contractor, they can't tell you who you can and cannot work for that duration. And so you need to have a look at it. So a little bit of searching I found out she's not an independent. She is a dependent contractor based on her based on her region. And I told her, you need to get in touch with a lawyer ASAP, because if CRA gets involved in this, you potentially are going to lose all of your deductions from your business, and you're going to have to pay a different type of income tax. And so there is possibly all sorts of things that could come down the pipe. And if you are set up that way, you don't have any right to any of the client list. And so there's a whole bunch of pieces at play with that. And it gets really scary really fast. Another one I heard was an advisor that said, so I did a thing. And I said, what was that? And they said, well, I signed with a new host agency, but I didn't read the contract first.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
So it's one of those things. Never sign without knowing what it says. That's one of the, like, it's so important. If you are like me and you are ADHD, and the idea of sitting down to read legalese 12, 15, 20 pages, because I swear sometimes the longer they are, the more likely they've tucked something in there that you need to know about. And it's probably 80% of the way through. That's when if you're not going to read it and have the comprehension of it, you need to hand it off to a professional who will read it, who understands it and can translate. I know for myself, I'm not going to read it. So I hire somebody else. I hire a legal team, legal professional to do this for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned like, they're just so you put out a lot there that I'm going to try to unpack. But basically, So we call independent contractor agreements, so-called IC agreements or a host agency agreement, whatever you want to call it. That agreement between you and your host agency as a travel advisor. Um, for me, the top two things that are big red flags are non-competes, like you mentioned, and then exclusivity provision. So non-compete, like in the United States, actually, and there are actually a number of states that prohibit non-competes. So technically, you can't even, it's illegal to put that in your contract. Like if you put it in your contract and that IC, independent contractor, is in California, that would be struck down by a court. The problem is you'd have to go fight that in court, and that takes time and money. But that is illegal in a lot of states. However, some states it's not. They say the two parties agreed, that whatever. And even if supposedly one side, they're supposed to be equal partner, equal on each side, but a lot of times there's a lot of unequal bargaining power there if you think about it. But anyhow, um, basically, non-competes, especially like the way that they work is that example you gave was perfect because what they typically want to do is they want to try to restrict your ability after you leave to compete against that very agency that you were hosted by. So they say, oh, 6 months is actually not bad. Oh, that's a pretty short time. Like some folks will try to make that longer. They'll try to make it like 1 year, 2 years. Like you can't compete. That basically is like what happens to your livelihood? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
cannot, you'll have to go to a totally different industry or that's insane. So non-competes are the worst. If for some crazy reason you feel like you still want to join that host agency and there is a non-compete, you have to negotiate that down. Like 6 months is not too bad. Ideally, like just maybe 3 months, 2 months, whatever, but just try to get rid of that if at all possible. Otherwise, I would just run away. Like that is just not that just looks really sketchy. Um, Another provision to beware of is exclusivity. So this becomes really tricky because some folks will be like, oh, okay. So basically, exclusivity is where the host agency says you can only do bookings through us. Like you can't basically be dual hosted. You cannot go to another host agency, have two contracts basically. It may not matter when everything's lovey-dovey great in the beginning and everything's going great. Because why would you? I mean, what a nightmare it would be, John. Why would you want to be with two hosts anyways? Like it might just be too difficult, too tricky to navigate that. Why would you do that? Well, you would do it if you decide you want to leave because you're like, what is your strategy? Because you want to be able to still book new clients while you transition. So you may still be under that host agency's agreement. But if they say you have to be exclusive, you're technically in breach if you start booking with another host agency. Sometimes, depending upon how it's phrased, you could be in breach if you just sign a contract with a new host agency. So let's say you're trying to get out, but you can't even sign the new contract. So like as soon as you leave, you're scrambling because you don't have anything lined up because you weren't allowed to have anything. So this is what you have to look for before you get into that relationship with the host agency. Before you get married, it's kind of like a prenup, right? You have to like read it and understand what is this going to be about. So those are probably the two top provisions that I think are big red flags. On the flip side, if you are an agency owner, it's also bad for you to include these provisions because it could actually make you're mentioning, I guess, from the Canadian perspective, whether you're an employee versus an independent contractor. If you have these types of provisions, it may not just be these provisions alone. There could be all sorts of factors. It's kind of like a facts and circumstances type of test. And there's stuff from a state employment perspective and also from a federal IRS like tax perspective. So there's different things that you can look at here. But anyhow, the bottom line is if you are restricting what these so-called you're actually not allowing these independent contractors to be independent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing that, those people, those advisors could be deemed your employees, which means you will have certain tax liabilities because you didn't do any of the withholding, you didn't provide, for instance, maybe employee benefits and all these things that you should be doing as an employer that you could get in trouble for after the fact and have all sorts of penalties and all sorts of issues. So it's to your advantage as a host agency owner not to have these provisions because if you're doing something else that may trigger this, this is just a nail in the coffin for you. So that's the type of thing you need to be aware of. You want to make sure. I also think just from a market perspective, you want to have a fair contract because if you really
Mhm.
want to attract good talent, especially people who are more savvy, the people who are savvy who are going to use a lawyer to review your contract are going to see this and be like, no, their lawyer is going to advise against signing with you, and then you're not going to get that good advisor. So
Right.
you want to offer up a fair and balanced contract. I think that is in your best interest as an agency owner as well. So it works both ways. I think that's key. But those are the two top things, two that I see all the time. But of course, there are tons of things in independent in IC agreements that folks should look out for, like compensation. How does that work? Like when are your commissions earned? I think the biggest thing is, I hate to say, okay, why you always think about leaving, but look at what happens after termination. Are you still allowed to service clients? Will you still get paid the commission that you earned? When was that commission technically earned? Was it earned when the client traveled or when you booked it? Like how is that set up? Is that addressed? Obviously, what is your commission split? How is it paid? How often is it paid? Um, the money aspect is huge. Another thing folks need to consider is marketing. Are you, as an independent advisor, allowed to have your own brand, or do you need to only use the host agency's brand? That's sort of like I mean, there's no right or wrong there. That depends on just the total host agency setup. At my the boutique, I worked. I was with a boutique agency before, and that was you were under their brand. You're basically more of a sub agent and
Mhm.
that type of model. So you were using their brand, but you were getting that intangible benefit of the brand from their marketing efforts. But what about like I'm with Nexion now, so that's a total opposite. That's like you can use our brand, but you're saying you are only allowed to say you're an independent affiliate of Nexion. And you basically, if you want to be successful, you should develop your own brand. So those types of things, marketing and intellectual property rights with logos, those types of things should be addressed. But how is that going to be? How is that going to work out between the parties? But yeah, those are probably some of my top highlights there.
So I'm going to tag on to a couple of those because you have a fabulous perspective as a lawyer. I'm going to say mine as a business coach. And as a business coach, always, always, always be in a position you can self brand because as much as there's strength in somebody else's brand, there's also weakness.
Yep.
And so you always want to be, I am a big believer, and whether you own the host agency or you are hosted, both of you should want to be in a relationship where everybody is there by choice, not because it's too hard to leave, because we have all seen that couple that should have divorced 10 years ago and they make each other miserable. And it's more and more by the day. And that has a ripple effect. That changes the culture of the company, that changes the culture of the brand. There's so many other elements at play. So I personally would far rather, not that I own a host agency or intend to, I would far rather build one where everybody is excited to be there and every day they wake up and they choose to be there rather than, oh my God, it's so hard to leave. I got to suck it up. And in which case you build an entire team built on resentment.
Mhm.
And that is never going to be a recipe for success in anybody. That's more of that gotcha moment. I gotcha
Mhm.
because you can't leave. And that
Exactly.
turns into abuse, like straight up.
It becomes like a toxic culture
Mm-hmm.
basically, and I've seen this through advisors time and time again where it's just they're not happy, and why do they want to leave? Because the owner is most of them are where the biggest issues come out is they're exceedingly controlling. And people, then of course, the ones that don't pay, if you don't get paid, that's another issue too. But yeah, it creates a toxic culture. And that's not good for any business or any
Right.
company for that matter.
Yeah. The other thing is every business owner, be it your host agency or be you as an IC, every person in business should start business with an exit strategy
Mhm.
because you should always know what that exit strategy is. Let's say you've decided to join travel in a later stage of life. Maybe this is your retirement career because you are way too young to sit at home and do nothing, but you don't want to do the corporate grind anymore. So you're doing this. You're in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s. What's your plan? You've now built up a phenomenal book of business. So what happens if you decide to full out retire? Are you able to sell that book of business to somebody else? Does the host agency own it? That's where knowing your exit strategy, knowing your contracts before you ever enter it is a big thing. What if, heaven forbid, something happened to you? There's been a tragic accident, something like, I know we're going dark here, but I've been in the industry long enough to see it happen where then your estate, maybe it's your children, maybe it's your spouse, they would then in theory take over the business. What are the provisions of that in your host agency agreement? Are they able to step in and take over the business? Or does the host agency say, nope, you're gone. All the commissions are ours. So, too bad, so sad. Because maybe you were now the primary income earner. And while you think you've built up this amazing business, if your contract doesn't allow for somebody else to step in and take it over, does the host agency now get the fruit of all of your labor? And so that's where, again, it's not about everything going bad. You mentioned prenups earlier. People don't get married with a prenup with the intention of getting divorced. It is because you are making these decisions when everything is still rainbows and unicorns. I would rather make it when it's rainbows and unicorns rather than thunder and lightning and hail. You know, you want to make sure you're doing it when everybody's in the best possible frame of mind, because here's the thing. If there's something in the contract while you're still in the honeymoon phase, that's like, wait, what? And it triggers you at that point. I promise you, when you're in the divorce phase, oh, that's going to be an ugly, ugly clause. So have it negotiated at the front end. Have it while you're still in a positive frame, or better yet, if it's not something that can be negotiated and it's a deal breaker for you, again, not in your honeymoon phase, is it going to be a deal breaker if things go sideways? Then you need to look at possibly somebody else. These are the moments when everything is, you should be at your peak of excitement, which is also actually, now that I'm saying this, also a good reason, even if you do read your whole contract, run it through a legal professional. I'm sure that if nothing else, that there's legal assistants and other such that have a bit of a background that maybe are not the same price point as a full-fledged lawyer. There is ways of having somebody else read it to go through it, because you've also got love goggles on. How many of you have ever seen somebody that's getting married and you're like, maybe you should take a pause. Like, could we just slow things down? Like, you've known each other for 3 weeks. Could we just slow it down a minute? Like, because it's really easy to get swept up in the excitement. And I do fully believe the travel industry attracts a lot of ADHD. So we love bomb hard and we fall in love fast. And so then we need to make sure that we're doing the due diligence, because due diligence on the front saves you a fortune in time, energy, and headache on the back end.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I like how you went dark on us, because that's all I do. I always think worst, as the lawyer in me, I always think worst case scenario. What is the worst thing that could happen here? And sometimes I have to step back from that and not be so negative all the time. But that's what I do on my behalf of my clients. I try to figure out the worst case scenario, but then I also just like, what's the practical, like what's really going to happen? So this is what the worst case is, but what's the reality and what can we do to make sure, that everything's going to work out good? I think I really love what you were talking about before. It was basically succession planning. What do you want? Like, how do you plan for whether you're going to retire? Do you want to sell your business? Or if something, like you said, something happens to you unexpectedly, whether you get incapacitated or if you were to die. I actually just wrote a column about this that's going to show up. I'm actually a columnist for Insider Travel Report. And this is going to be my next column for August. So be on the lookout. If you don't subscribe to that, it'll be coming out in August. But that's one of the things I think is so important. It's something similar. Like when you have those love goggles on, I love that reference, love goggles on. That's when you have to start actually thinking about your exit strategy. Because then it's fresh in your mind. You're not getting extra. I mean, we're all busy, but like you want to be able to document these things from an operational perspective. Like, how can someone step in? And then who's going to be that person? There are people do succession planning agreements, and lawyers can help with that. Like, is there another fellow travel advisor? Will there be a mentor or somebody that you've been working with? It could be someone at the same host agency, could be someone you've met at an ASTA conference, or like another, your host agency conference or something, consortia, whatever, who shares your ideals, or at least like has similar clients, or those types of things. So think about that. So succession planning. Also, not just succession planning, but also in your independent contractor agreement, in your host agency agreement. Yeah, we talked about what happens when you leave, but yeah, who owns that client list? Who is going I mean, I've seen there's different setups because some agencies actually provide leads to independent advisors. And depending upon the setup, the host agency could still have a right to those clients after you leave. The argument being, well, we did the marketing, we brought them in. So yes, you can earn a certain set amount of commission while you're with the agency, but when you leave, that's still our client. That's fair, I think. But what if you brought the client in? I mean, you should own, if it's your client, you brought them in, you should own it. And that should somehow be addressed in the contract. Or at least maybe in the negative, you're basically, the only ones that the host agency can keep are their own agency leads. Otherwise, it's assumed that you keep anything else. So that type of thing needs to be addressed too. So yeah, succession planning, plan always, and then yes, you do need to think the worst case scenario. It's just one of those things you have to do. Take off the glove goggles just for a moment and just, get back to reality. And if it's too hard to do on your own, highly recommend talk to a lawyer to do it, to help out.
For sure, for sure. And you used, I think this is where you maybe flip back to being an advisor, because you use some of the language I hear advisors. Well, it should be this way. I assume, like,
Yeah.
never assume, never
Yeah,
go with the
yes.
shoulds. The lawyer is going to, that's when the lawyer will step out and say, yes, that's how it should happen. However,
Yeah,
that's not a guarantee. And so
absolutely.
I think sometimes advisors stop at the shoulds and assumptions.
Yeah.
And of course, I was raised when you assume, you know what you make out of you and me. So, uh, but ultimately, you've just got to read those contracts. And, prior to prior to the actual episode starting, as we were recording, I've started recording episodes before we actually start recording, because sometimes that's where the best gold is. And so we talked a little bit about ChatGPT. And we just got straight into it, and then we came over to record. But again, I think it's so important to reference back to AI again. And I was saying how, to me, AI was I was an early adopter. And in so many ways, I now see it as a great party trick, because so many have now handed over their entire marketing. They're handing over everything, and people can sniff that out. People want authenticity. They want to know they're dealing with a human. They can AI their own stuff. They don't need you if you're AI. They'll just go straight to the AI source. And so that's where it's so important that you put yourself first. That's my own little, soapbox about AI. But let's just reiterate again what you were saying in terms of client attorney privilege and things like that, if you're running things through AI.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, yes, AI is a very useful tool for all of us as lawyers, as advisors, all of our roles. However, one thing you really need to be careful of is if you have a contract and you put it into AI, you're basically putting that into open source, and it's no longer going to be confidential. It's no longer going to be protected by attorney-client privilege. So if something wrong were to happen, let's say down the road, we're talking about dark, yeah, you get sued. Something happens. If you had that document in AI, it may not be protected, on all the advice relating to that document too, may not be protected. Sometimes, and this is where, you know, I, here's an example. So let's say you are actually working with your lawyer on your document, and as some people frequently do on Word or like Google Docs, they put little comment bubbles and notes. Those could be deemed from your, especially if your lawyer's putting the notes in, that could be the legal advice and it's in the document. And then you throw that document into AI, the, the protection on that legal advice is gone. So that's an example of where that would come into play. So basically, yeah, if you got into a dispute or you got sued, if your lawyer's like, no, no, we can't, this particular draft is not admissible because attorney-client privilege, then, you know, it's probably possible based on discovery and how things play out that the other side could figure out that that got put into AI. I mean, there's just technology, like there's just so much that can go wrong there. So yeah, I'm not a litigation expert. I don't actually do litigation, but I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough to advise. Please do not put your contract into ChatGPT or any other legal document for that matter.
And you know enough to get as far away from litigation for your clients
Yeah,
as possible.
that is my goal. Like my goal as an attorney is to get folks not only set up for success and but also just make sure that we're going down the right path so that we don't get, you know, we mitigate risk. We try to do business properly, so that we don't ever risk getting sued. Like I want to make sure that my clients have strong agreements and that, or, you know, let's say they're going with a host agency and they want me to review their agreement. I want to make sure they have something solid or at least that's fair and balanced so that we're not exposing ourselves to significant risk. I mean, there's risk everywhere. There's always going to be risk, but how big it is and, you know, having to like at least help people. I try to help people explain it to them and quantify it possibly as well so that people understand it. And if they are going to accept risk, they at least do it with their eyes wide open. I mean, that I think is essential. It's one thing, I mean, if you don't hire a lawyer and you sign this contract, you may not even know what you're signing up for, what that actual risk is until it's too late. I mean, that's what I try to help clients with, is understand risk. Yeah, maybe they do want to sign that crappy agreement, but at least they went in with their eyes wide open, knowing, okay, I think to me it's worth it because they're going to pay me this much more commission. Okay, fine, but at least you've been warned or you
Mhm.
understand what you're doing. That I think that's what's essential.
It's kind of making that educated decision versus that ignorant decision.
Exactly, exactly.
So, and you know, I've heard the term, you know, I'll just plead ignorance. That actually isn't a defense.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
So overall, obviously we talked about negotiation. What else would you tell an advisor when they're looking at a host agency? Is there any other red flags or anything that you've seen that they should, you know, at least just flag it so that they have an awareness? Because I think, again, sometimes simply having an awareness of things is important.
Absolutely. Well, I just think it's very important for advisors to do diligence. So, one of the biggest resources out there, I put a plug out for host agency reviews. Like this website has got tons of reviews from people. So, maybe also be careful about if you find an agency that's like overly, like really positive, take it with a grain of salt though. But you will usually, the people who are going to put negative reviews out will usually put it out, but you know, go to host agency reviews, Google the agency, look under news for the agency.
Mm.
If there's, you know, when you do a Google search and you know the tab that says news, because sometimes you might find out the history of a particular host agency owner and it may not be so pretty. So do diligence on the agency, on the owner. Talk to the other advisors. Like definitely like try to interview them and ask, obviously, you know, do as much diligence as possible, basically. So, I mean, it's the type, it's just like you were going to like if you're applying for a new job, you want to know about your potential employer. You want to know, you
Right.
want to talk to people. Go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a huge resource. Look up what's going on there. I think those are probably the top ones. I mean, you could actually do some formal searches in terms of like, I mean, you really want to go there, like pay money to do like criminal background stuff, things like that. But honestly, like Google News, that should cover, that should probably cover most of anything that's out there. But I just think it's just essential to do your research, do your diligence, um, work with your accountant to make sure that you're set up properly as a business. So this is another thing that I advise people on is if you're not incorporated, whether as a corporation or a liability company, like an LLC, for instance, you are putting yourself at huge risk because there's something out there. Well, basically, your personal assets are up for grabs, basically. So let's say you are going to, I mean, whether you're a business, whether you like it or not, because you're
Mhm.
selling to the public, you're engaging in business. So make sure that you're properly incorporated and you have proper corporate documents, such as an operating agreement or bylaws or whatnot. That's another thing a lawyer can help with, but make sure you're properly formed because one thing I'm sure Canada has a similar concept in the US. They have this legal concept called piercing the corporate veil, where basically if you do not maintain those types of corporate formalities, like if you're not properly formed, if you don't like have a separate bank account, for instance, um, keeping your business and personal assets separate, then let's say you were to get sued or you do get in a client dispute, that client can actually come after your personal assets. And that's what they're talking about, piercing the corporate veil. So maybe you created a corporation, but you're not running it properly and keeping things separate. That's where you have to be careful. So the worst case scenario is being what they call a sole proprietor. You have no business at all. Then, we were talking about succession planning. You can't even sell your business because you can't sell yourself. I mean, you have to have a company, or you don't have any shares you could sell. So there's that aspect. So you need to incorporate so you're a legit business. That also helps you from a marketing perspective. Think about it. Like if I were a client, I'd rather do business with somebody who has a company than somebody, I don't know, some Joe Schmo that like or Jane Schmo, who basically like it's just them and their Gmail account. I mean, I hate to say it, but I actually kind of cringe every time I get an email from an advisor with just a Gmail account. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it just looks so much more professional and legit if you get your own domain, like those types of things. So that's not pure legal. I mean, that's just practical business advice,
Yep.
but um, I ramble now, but like basically, yeah, when you have a small business, run it like a business. Make sure it's properly set up so that you can protect your assets.
Absolutely. And I think that's even a great place to leave it. You are in business, whether by default or by design, you are in business and you need to run it that way. I did a business boot camp training, like I think 2 years ago we did it. Maybe we'll have to bring that back. And one of the nuggets that blew everybody away and left my flabbers gasted was when I told them all they needed a separate bank account. And the amount of them that said, why? Was like, because you're in business. They're like, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, so if nothing else, if ever CRA or your IRS wants to audit, they're going to audit your entire life because you're running out of one. Like, do you really want to give them? Because then you have to have the receipts for everything you've purchased, including your underwear and your toothpaste and whatever all else. Like, because you have to show them that no, that was not business money. That was my own personal. Like, you put it in a different bank account. I actually have all of mine in a different bank to keep it very separate. My personal accounts are in one bank, actually in two banks, and my business is in a third bank because I want to make sure that there is no crossover, that anything that is in this bank is business, and I never accidentally cross contaminate that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I love you had said business boot camp. That's another webinar I've done is small business boot camp. It's funny because like, yeah, and I kind of gave people like a checklist of like, and you mentioned, licensing and forming the company and the bank account. And then, getting, at least in the US, your tax ID number and this and that. Like there's like I have like a whole little checklist because and this isn't something, even if you've been in business for like 10 years and you're like, oops. It's never too late. You
Yeah,
can always fix things and so that going forward you are more legit and you don't encounter issues. So that's totally fine. And like, whether it be your accountant, lawyer, whomever can help you with that if needed.
absolutely. Absolutely. So if they want to connect with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can visit my website, which is the name of my law firm is GFH Law PLC. So my website is gfhlawplc.com. And I have a contact form there. So that's the easiest way to find me. But yeah, you could probably do the Google search and you can find me. I'm there. You'll see you'll see me from a travel advisor perspective and a lawyer perspective. So yeah,
Fantastic.
that's the best way to find me. GFHLawPLC.com.
Fabulous. We will make sure we link that up in the show notes as well so that it's easy to find. And if nothing else, this is where I think AI works. AI can give you the lowdown on host agencies, on lawyers, on all sorts of things. And I do love the way that they summarize it. And they're like, overall, this is how people feel. And insider tip, if they've ever made it onto Reddit, AI will pick that up. AI loves Reddit.
I
So if
agree.
you
I love Reddit too. So I agree with, yeah, that's a good spot.
so if the host agency you're looking at has made it to Reddit, AI will definitely make sure you see that. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. And once again, happy selling.
Appreciate it. Take care.